Before we begin this episode, there will be no episodes for this show in January. In January, we will be working on our feature film, Diamonds Are a Murderer's Best Friend. We'll return in February.
The bad news is, this show is ending in February, so after this there will be only 2 more episodes. But our series isn't ending anytime soon, so you guys will still see us regularly. Anyway, let's get started.
On this episode, we'll be reviewing the John Landis horror comedy, An American Werewolf in London.
This movie came out in 1981, so it's 41 years old. In this movie, we got David Naughton, Griffin Dunne, Jenny Agutter and John Woodvine.
The movie starts with 2 American tourists, David Kessler, played by David Naughton, and Jack Goodman, played by Griffin Dunne, on a trip in England. They stop by a pub called the Slaughtered Lamb and go in. But the pub goers aren't happy to see them.
Why? Because they're American?
I guess so.
When Jack can't keep his mouth shut, they get kicked out of the pub. But the bartender knows that it's a full moon and a werewolf is out there. She tries to convince them to stay, but it doesn't work. So these people want David and Jack to get mauled to death.
When they go outside, they hear the howling, but it's no use. The werewolf jumps out of nowhere and mauls Jack to death. And he pounces on David and scratches him. But before he can kill him, the patrons of the Slaughtered Lamb come out and shoot the wolf to death.
David looks over at the wolf, but instead of seeing a dead animal, he sees the dead body of a naked man. So this means that a werewolf who dies in wolf form immediately morphs back into a human. David loses consciousness and wakes up 3 weeks later in a London hospital.
This is when David learns about Jack's death. In the hospital,
we get introduced to Dr. Hirsch and Nurse Alex Price.
They're played by John Woodvine and Jenny Agutter.
David and Alex hit it off and start developing feelings for each other. But if you thought the werewolf attack was terrifying, the nightmares that David has are even worse. First, David is running through the woods naked and grabs a deer and eats it alive.
The vegan teacher wouldn't like that.
In the second dream, David is in the forest again, but this time he's got clothes on. Thank God. He sees himself in a hospital bed with Alex at his side. Then he wakes up with a demonic-looking face. In the third dream, this one is really weird. David is at home with his family and someone keeps banging on his door. When his dad answers it, these horrifying creatures in Nazi uniforms open fire on the whole family and trash his house. In the fourth and final dream, David wakes up in the hospital and Alex goes to open the curtains for him. But when she does that, the same Nazi person jumps out and stabs her.
Later on, Jack's ghost shows up and tells him that because he survived the attack, he's the last living werewolf. And then the wolf's bloodline has to be severed.
That means David must die. Also, Jack has to stay in limbo until David dies, so he's pressuring David to kill himself. If he doesn't, then he could kill people.
When David gets discharged, Alex invites David to stay with her at her flat. In the middle of the night, Jack shows up again, but this time, he goes from looking like a torn-up body to a zombie.
So that means he deteriorates each time he shows up, and he continues to nag David about killing himself.
The next day, Alex leaves for work and David stays at the flat by himself. That night, he turns into a werewolf, and it's the scariest part of the whole movie. After that, he leaves the flat and kills people.
First, he kills an engaged couple named Harry and Judith. Then some homeless men and a guy in the subway.
I'm getting tired of talking. Let's pause this episode. We'll give y'all a second episode next week. And y'all are lucky you get an extra episode.
We'll see you guys next week.